Horror here at Virtual Horror Con 2022. I am Logan Dean, and I'll be your guide on this journey into uh, Spooky Town. Okay, we were talking about setting up this panel, and we realized that the horror scene and tabletop role-playing games has been dominated by a large tentacle beast monster since the late 70s. And, as indie games evolve and change, we're finding new influences that aren't Howard Phillips Lovecraft. So let's just move that guy right aside and start talking about new and exciting things that have nothing to do with his garbage. We are joined today by some luminary designers of the indie tabletop role-playing game scene, and we're going to go around and introduce them one by one, starting with Evlyn.
Hello. My name is Evlyn Moreau, and maybe you know me because of my illustration, but I do also some writing and design for games. I've recently published Where is the Weeds Grow Tall, co-writing with Camilla Greer, and and I've been all over the place doing illustration all the time. Yeah.
Thank you. And we're going to move on to Nick next.
Yeah, so I'm you'll probably know me as Goblin Archives. I wrote the game Liminal Horror, which is a modern horror game, and we're actually publishing a couple adventures, me and Josh, and I'll let Josh go next.
Yes, I'm Josh. I write adventures. I do design work and layout work to make them look pretty. And I wrote The Bureau, or co-wrote The Bureau with Nick here, which is an adventure for Liminal Horror. You can find that on itch.io on the Goblin Archives page, along with The Mall, which is something that another module that Nick wrote as well. Both of those will be coming to physical form July 15th for the Exalted Funeral Summer Sale, so keep an eye out.
And we'll pass it, last but not least, over to Noora.
I'm Noora. I run Monkey's Paw Games, which started off as my self-publishing imprint, but now I do distro and retail for a lot of zines, including Where the Weed Grows Tall, in specifically Canada, because Canadian shipping is expensive. And I've written a lot of horror stuff for Trophy and a few other small things, and now I mostly just disseminate poisonous ideology on
Twitter. And I am Logan. I wrote a game called The Company, Corporate Survival Horror. I compiled an expansion for that called the Conflict Resolution Guidelines, and I write modules. There it is. And then I wrote a module called Extraction from Demon Fucked Cleveland 1996, which is fun. I read it the other day. I think I got the words in the right order, so that's good. We're gonna jump right in here, and I've got a few guideposts here, but we're gonna kind of try and keep this more conversational in tone while staying on rails, instead of it being me grilling these wonderful designers. So let's start with what would you say are one or two of your biggest horror influences? And we're going to keep this light and loose, so please, anybody feel free to chime in at any time.
Well, I guess I'll start because I have these written down. I've got two that I wanted to kind of signal as touchstones. The first one is a very easy one, and that's the Alien movie. The late 1970s, kind of one of those deals where studios were looking for the next Star Wars. And the folks who were making, Jodorowsky's Dune, when that spectacularly failed, came together to make this. I think it's one of the best horror movies ever made. I don't know if that's an opinion shared by everybody, but the reason I consider one a big influence is, one, because I saw it far too young. And two, I think that movie is a masterclass at tension. It's 2 hours long, and if you count it down, the xenomorph, when it shows up, I think it only has 4 minutes of screen time. But there is that scene, the moment it kind of comes out of Kane's chest. It's just the movie switches for one, and then two, despite the fact that you don't see the xenomorph like ever, its presence is felt the entire time. So when you're looking at that like good media, like showing that monster too much kind of kills the horror a little bit because you're used to it, but keeping that thing hidden. And so you look at Aliens as the follow-up. Aliens is also a very good movie. Aliens is a very different movie. There's hundreds of the Xenos are coming at all times. That's action, that's there's obviously some horror elements with that too, but with the two compared to each other, one is tension, the other is big Marines getting eaten by aliens.
Absolutely. Yeah, please, anybody, if you want to throw in, we can keep this moving along.
I'll, chime in, I guess, because I love Alien is a great one, and in a similar vein, I want to talk to for John Carpenter, and specifically The Thing, which I think for me might be it's always like ask me on a Monday, and I say the best horror movie ever made is Alien, and on a Tuesday it's The Thing. And I think they both do, it's really like similar themes of paranoia. There's that sort of oppressive feeling of being hunted by something. And then also isolation and a feeling of like almost claustrophobia because you're in a confined space. There's no escape. There's no help coming for you. And I'll get into more of why I think The Thing is. I'm going to go with The Thing today as my perfect horror movie, but I think that's top tier. John Carpenter is a genius. Plus, it's got one of the best scores out of any movie ever.
But yeah, that Marconi score is top notch.
So you saw me react because that actually is also mine. Carpenter's like generally, but The Thing especially. And just to add a little bit onto that, and this is a big pitch if you haven't seen it, you need to go see it. But sort of us as the audience in it, and the sense of the unknown between what is going on and who's being replaced, and the surprise. Like even every time I watch it, it takes me by surprise. I notice things, even the end and sort of that how it ends and how we're left as the audience feeling and wondering. I think is great, right? It doesn't wrap everything up neatly. I'm left dwelling upon it, not only like the themes but the visuals, and just you can't get better VFX than that movie right there.
I guess it's me that's left.
Yeah, please go. I mean,
so I made an effort to avoid choosing Alien and The Thing. So, and I would say that for me it will be Nightbreed.
Oh wow, yeah,
yeah. It's nearly kind of fairy stuff, and I really like that. So I think there's a lot of things that I can connect with in that movie, with the creature design, the people, and how it's a small community too. And there's a lot of stuff going on in Nightbreed that I really enjoy. It's not a perfect movie. It's a bit like a clumsy movie, but it's really fun and enjoyable. And yeah, I really like that. And another movie that has been influenced on me, it's a very small movie, like may not know. It's called Plus One, 2013, from Denis Iliadis, the guy that made Last House on the Left. But it's about like people being like, there's a meteorite that fell on Earth and people become doubles. There's double of everyone, and people start killing each others. And I really like this weird setting where there's a weird situation and everything. And what I really like in that movie is that there's a character that was a girl, and spoiler, but when she meet her double, instead of killing each other, they become friends. And because like for them it was not like a big deal to see someone. And so I really enjoy that. I really like horror when you can also venture into the wonder aspect of it, like sometimes you go beyond norms and stuff, and you can reach like something new and weird. And so I really like that aspect of that movie. But there will be also comic books and actually Junjito and also Black Hole from Joel Burns. That is really great. Like a lot of body horror. I also love body horror.
Amazing. Yeah, I also love the films of Carpenter. I'm a Prince of Darkness man myself. It's in terms, especially with the company, my largest influence on that was the HBO miniseries Chernobyl. It's that industrial horror, not knowing what's going on. I was incredibly influenced by that. I also just really loved Jared Harris. It changed how I saw what could be a horror scenario, and was the direct influence for how I do facility horror and stuff like that. So, I try to. I also really love the works of Brian Evanson and Thomas Ligotti. Those are huge influences on me, coming from a horror fiction background, because I used to write horror fiction. I still do, but I used to too. And I come from a comedy background, so stuff like Shaun of the Dead. I get a lot of influence from things like Wet Hot American Summer for my horror and stuff. So I try to pick from non-traditional horror things to pull in, which is fun. And which leads us into our next guidepost, which is what are some of your favorite non-traditional horror systems? And this doesn't necessarily need to be a system designed for horror. If you have a system you like running horror and that's not traditionally for it, please share it. I'd love to hear your opinions.
I guess I'll kick us off. The one that I wanted to highlight here is I'm still fairly new to this, but it's sort of captured my brain space, and I can't think of anything else now. And that's Trophy, both dark and gold. So Trophy is a system. I think it's derivative of Cthulhu Dark in some manner, but it's definitely veered off of into its own path. But it's mechanically simple. Like, you're rolling d6s. I think the most you'll roll on any given roll is 3 or so. You're looking for 6s. I mean, it's hard to get simpler than that. But the system itself, and the reason I think it's really good for horror, is that it encourages this collective narrative and player agency, where the design prompts, the way that it's written, encourages you. It's not just the GM doling out this horror, it's the players kind of having input and talking about potentially what they find scary, what they find terrifying for their characters. And it allows you to kind of guidepost what you want to feature within the session. So specifically, Trophy's got this mechanic called the Devil's Bargain, where when you do something risky, when you as a player say, I want to jump across this ravine, you can roll your dice as normal if you have a skill or whatever that's associated with jumping, but the risk roll allows the other players at the table to propose bargains. These are sort of things that will happen no matter what. So if you jump across that ravine, even if you are successful, something happens no matter what. Now, this doesn't always have to be horror related. This could be, you lose your tools as you jump across the ravine. But what it does is it allows the player whose character is doing that action to opt in to things that they want to happen in the narrative. So if I say, I want to jump across the ravine, and a player says, oh, you jump across the ravine and a terrible tentacle monster crawls out or something like that, which is a little bit of a hyperbolic example, but I can, as a player, go, oh, you know what? I don't want that. I'm not going to take that bargain. Or I can say, I'm going to embrace the horror. Let's do this.
Very cool. Anybody else got another one?
Yeah, I'll someone already mentioned Mothership, and that was it's kind of, so as soon as you posted these questions the other night, I was like, oh, I'm gonna get in trouble for at least 4 of these, because I think, again, getting into ideology, but so I think when it comes to horror, as far as systems go, I like Mothership because I think it does what a horror game, or what people are looking for a horror game, which is like Trophy, like, I don't know, Dark Heresy, games that the horror is an element that's represented by mechanisms in the game that you can overcome or fall victim to, as opposed to just vibes. Not that there aren't horror games that are just vibes, but you look at, say, like Dread, where all the tension is from pulling the blocks. Mosh, you've got stress. Dark Heresy and such, you have like, insanity, corruption, these kind of things that are like, so I think those are typically my favorite, like capital H, like this is a horror game that we're playing. Because you can do horror with anything, but there's a difference between like, we're going to play a game and there's going to be a horror element in the narrative, and like sitting down and we are going to play a horror game. But I think Mothership is a great example of like, okay, we're sitting down to play a horror game, and it does, like, everything on the box is exactly what you want out of it. And it's got those satisfying moments of like death spiraling of, your mercenaries fail 8 stress tests in a row and start taking flamethrowers to everybody, and that's the game mechanisms help create sort of interesting moments just in failure, because I think that's like a key element of again what you're kind of looking for when you're talking about a horror game, because a key element of horror is it's kind of the antithesis of heroic fantasy, where it's not like you're coming in and saving the day. It's like you're running for your life. You're tripping over the invisible roots on the ground as the slasher villain comes up behind you and fumbling for your keys and stuff like that. So it's about failure. So provoking opportunities where you can fail interestingly, like in Trophy with the bargains and stuff. I think those are key elements for what I think people typically look for. And yeah, Mothership knocks it out the park.
I definitely agree that sort of idea of what makes a game that succeeds at horror or reinforces it is that like failure is interesting.
Fail forward.
Yeah. Like you're saying, it is what I'm sort of looking. Not that I want bad things to happen to these characters, because you end up caring about them, and sometimes you sort of do, because it makes the story more interesting if that's the themes we're going for sitting at the table. And so when Logan had said, hey, maybe a game that's not traditionally horror, I'm just going to pull it off the shelf just because, but like, I really like Electric Bastion Land for running horror. It's the Into the Odd Chassis, which is ostensibly it's the same game as Liminal Horror. The setting's just slightly different and a couple different mechanics, but the idea that the mechanics allow you to fail and fail interestingly, and then Electric Bastion Land has like bureaucratic horror, and that setting is really fun. It has, I think, that when you can juxtapose moments of levity, makes it so when the bad stuff happens, it's way, way more interesting.
Right, and even like the city of Bastion, when you think about it on like an existential level, that would be an awful place to live in. It's the city that's constantly expanding and changing to the point where nobody can reliably map it.
Sure.
I don't know. What do you think, Evlyn? What's a system that really gets the horror for you?
None. I'm very. I there's no horror game that I really like or satisfy me system wise. I mean, they're game, yes, but so I usually just use like anything that is OSR, old school, with low hit points and low level characters, and I can go with that. But yeah, I don't have favorite system.
Hey, that's valid. I think we could kind of loop into like our next guidepost with this conversation we're having, which is, do you think systems matter for horror? Personally, for the company, I completely ripped off Mothership. I just took the percentile away and made it D10s. And then something I like that I did there was I put in an ability, a mechanic to spend against yourself to actually cause harm to your character in order to try to get forward. which is something like I hadn't seen in a game before that I really liked. My favorite system to run horror in is Troika, because of this a similar deal with Bastionland, which is I like surreal horror. I like things that are like the world is slowly unraveling, and I like to stay away from things like insanity or negative mental health connotations, because I think that, you know, as we evolve in our conversations about and around mental health, I think we need to start kind of positioning how we present it in media. And the way that Call of Cthulhu has done this is to have it be like a detrimental thing, which I don't think is fair. So in your opinions, do you think the systems, and Evlyn's kind of chimed in on this, do you think systems matter for horror? Noora's mentioned that, you know, she thinks that the tension built into the system is good for the horror. Is there any other opinions you might have on that?
So go ahead.
No.
So whenever this comes up, I always say that system matters, but system matters doesn't matter, because it's kind of a statement that it has too many answers that the answers become useless. So it's like, what does the system matter for? You know what I mean? So like for horror specifically, I definitely agree with Evlyn. I don't think it matters, but it generally doesn't matter, because for things to be, it depends on whether you're talking about horror as a vibe, like something that is frightening to the players, or horror as a diegetic thing that's happening to the characters. So like in order for me to be afraid, that requires buy-in. Like I have to be like, I am entering a mind space where I am willing to, you know, like turn the lights down and have like the scary soundtrack, or, you know, like when you're reading a horror novel or you're watching a scary movie or something like that, there's buy-in. And there requires even more buy-in in a game, because a lot of these games are power fantasies. You can just say no to things. Like it's so, you know, there's no mechanism in somebody reading you or telling you a horror story, but that can still be scary. So then the system doesn't matter, right? Because like that's just, you're engaging with a text that's basically playing to a degree. And so, you know, like not to get too weeded in like ontology, but it matters in the sense that you can have individual elements in the mechanisms that contribute to tension. So like if you're playing Dread's the example that I always use. If you're playing Dread and you're trying to make a very difficult pull, you know, the tower's this high and it's all spindly and stuff, there's tension. In the same way that if you have to succeed at a difficult roll, there's tension. But that's different from it being horror. And that tension in the roll is supposed to simulate the kind of fear that a character may be experiencing, but it's still different. So you can have individual elements in the mechanism that contribute to a sense of horror, but also you could find the horror element of the game just in the situation that's being told and the way it's being described, and that has nothing to do with the text or the way the game's designed. It has everything to do with the table. So it's kind of like it matters, but like it matters to whom and under what circumstances, and that has so much more to do with who's playing and how than anything written in a book. Ideology.
I completely agree, right? Like, it's funny, we make systems, and some of us do, and some of us make adventures and all of that. I think different mechanics are tools like that can support play, and again, it's what really matters is what's at the table, and sort of like the situation being presented. I think of a specific example. There's a mechanic I added to the mall that is these things called whisper cards. You get them, you're the only one who sees them, and it can trigger that you have been replaced by the thing, right? That in and of itself isn't horror, and that in and of itself isn't scary. It can build tension, but it really matters how it's being used in play in the table. And during one of the play tests we had, there's a moment where it gets revealed. And one of the players, he reads the card and he's just like, well, that doesn't matter. No one's been replaced. And then there's the moment where the other people at the table reveal they've been replaced. And it was really funny and it's fun. And, you know, like that tension. But the mechanic itself didn't create that memorable moment. It helped facilitate it, but it really was the fact that we had just played multiple sessions together, really cared about these characters and how things spiraled and turned sideways. And I think that's why, you know, like what Evlyn's saying and Noora's saying is like, you can really use any system. It really matters about what you're coming to at the table and sort of what you're building. Mechanics can help, and that's why, you know, you choose different things for different stories you're wanting to tell, but I don't think it's a limiter in any sense of the word, like, oh, I can't tell this story with this system.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
then kind of
absolutely.
to spiral a little bit off of that, I think that there are systems and mechanics that could get in the way, you know, on the other end, where it's not inherent that, you know, you can run horror in anything, but there are some that are probably unfit for the job, you know, just because it's the big elephant in the room. You can run a great horror adventure in D&D 5th edition, but when you start to get into the realm of a game that's designed to fight monsters, you could have potentially hundreds of hit points. And with monsters that can have hundreds of hit points, if you're sitting there and your xenomorph is taking 30 points of damage, doing 10 to you, and it's like a 4-hour conflict against one creature, you can maintain horror for that, but you start to kind of lose that sense of tension, the sense of buy-in from the characters. This bag of meat points becomes boring, you know, at a certain point. So like I said, it's always fun to run with the system that's more designed for horror because you run into that a little less. But again, like I said, there are things that can break the tension and break the immersion simply by not being designed to run something scary.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, you can do horror with D&D if you avoid engaging with the system.
I just as a question more than a challenge. So talking about the difference between Alien and Aliens, aside from does everybody know the story of how Aliens got funded? James
No.
Cameron went into a studio and wrote Alien on a chalkboard, and then he wrote an S and turned it into a $sign.
James Cameron wanted to make Starship Troopers and did it with the Alien IP. So.
Right. But so that's you're mentioning that's like a different kind of horror in that it's like an action movie more than like a slasher movie. But there's an element of horror to the attrition of the soldiers and the force brought to bear being completely ineffective against their adversary and being picked off one by one, in the same way that like Predator is an action movie, but there are horror elements. And so I look at, if you're trying to play a horror game using 5th edition, you may not be playing into the same level of powerlessness on a one-on-one situation, but it's like, or take a zombie movie, for example. You know, you're not afraid of one zombie. You're afraid of there being 1,000 of them. And now you're out of ammunition and maybe your friend's been bitten and you don't have enough water to go more than 3 days. You know what I mean? So I think it just, you have to reassess your definition of what you're trying to accomplish that is frightening. And is it you're being stalked by one super powerful monster? Because no, then it just becomes, like you said, you got 120 hit points. It has, then it just becomes, I forget whose blog it was, but they described high level combat as calculators at dawn, which I love using that because you're just throwing numbers at each other, right? But there is kind of an element of horror in that attrition of the numbers, where it becomes instead of 1 versus 1, it's like we have to get from X to Y, and there are this many roadblocks, and now we're running out of supplies, and now these are like there are things that we can fight on a one-on-one basis because we're sort of being like slowly ground down. And I think that you could do in 5th edition very well.
Can I?
Yes, please.
Well, but I think you're right. You can do that. Well, I think what I find interesting with like game with like 5th edition is that because when you enter into combat, the game switch. You become it's the table talk. Bring in people talk, and like every time 5e game I've played, like it's become very chill, and like I feel like the tensions go, and often the combat will be long. So like you really switch mood from like trying to create role-playing game tension on the table. Like it's become more like a board game suddenly, and not all the time naturally, but often when you have a long fight with a lot of characters and monsters, it become the way you interact with each other and the game master, everything. I think like it's switched and changed. I think it's probably possible to still do our intention if everybody's very focused, but usually the table will go very chill and people will start laughing, making jokes.
Sort of a thing that I'm pulling from what we're all talking about is when it boils down to it, what seems to really matter is investment in the characters and in each other. Because when you have those things and then an intentionality with how the scenario is set up to push on those things. Noora, you were talking about like the attrition and then like, oh no, my friend's going right. And like, that's where that investment I have in this character. And that's where us as the table can push on that. And especially if we all are aware, like, hey, we're going to be playing a horror scenario or a horror game. And so we understand that what the stakes are. And oftentimes, at least a lot of the systems we did talk about tend to have a high lethality or an understanding that characters can be harmed or killed. And having that understanding and then pushing on it in whichever way. And I think in that sense too, system doesn't necessarily matter as long as we're understanding the setup, the framing, in order to elicit the themes that we're going to. Like I know, like when I write an adventure, I'm going for a certain set of themes or like horror subgenre, and like try to make that explicit at the beginning, so that way the table can understand, like, hey, this is what we're engaging in. Or like with the company, right, we're doing corporate horror, and understanding that and understanding those stakes, and those are the variables that we would push on.
And that's a really good segue into our next topic here, which is, when you're creating an original concept, whether it's a system, a module, a piece of art, where do you start? Like, where do you start with that intention?
So I think it's one of those things where media at this point is a little derivative in some manner. I don't quite remember what the actual quote is or who I'm supposed to be quoting, but there's only like X number of stories out there.
Right.
And we can only just take those and put a spin on them to create our own ideas. So I think it's very easy to start with an idea, just taking something that and morphing it. Just to kind of touch on something that I wrote, there's an upcoming adventure. It's called Tangled for Old School Essentials. The idea being this sort of it's a funnel. So you're taking a bunch of farmers on level 0 folks and throwing them into a dungeon to be killed off. But it's this creeping mass of vines that has burst forth from a dungeon and threatens the hometown. Now, the original idea from this, it spun off of the title. I was looking through stuff after finishing up a previous module that had released right before I started coming up with the idea, and I saw the Alien illustrated edition, where somebody made a graphic novel of the first Alien movie. and they have this cover. The original cover is like alien in this bold like lettering that takes up 2/3 of the front of the book. And I was like, you know what? Next time I write something, I want to do that for the cover. And so, like 3 seconds later, I was like, Tangled sounds like a good name. Let's get a cover. And then it kind of spun outward into a proper idea from there. But yeah, it was just like looking at something that I really liked that kind of got the gears turning.
Sure.
I have read Tangled 5 times now, and I keep finding more things that I haven't run it yet because I haven't had time to run any more funnels lately. But I'm very excited for other people to see it too. It's good. That the picture mimic. I'm not going to say anything more. I'm not going to ruin it for everybody. But
yeah, so I co-wrote that with Riley Coyote, and I wrote most of the original draft back in like January, and then handed it off to Riley, who made it so much better. Like that talking about the picture mimic, that was not my idea, and I love every second of it. So
Riley, that's a great encounter.
I personally, I start with what am I ripping off this week? So it's like, hey, I'm influenced by this. How do I just turn this into something I can chill? But I got a piece of advice a few years ago from Jarrett Crater that was, there are no original ideas and nobody designs in a bubble. And that kind of took all of that pressure away from my pastime of just wholesale ripping people off constantly. So now I don't feel bad about it. I just feel excited about ideas. I'd love to hear from Evlyn on this one, because I'm not an illustrator anymore by choice, but I'd love to hear like how your process works.
Well, it varies a lot. I will not say that I have one way to do it, but usually I try to just it's spring from something I care about or something I want to explore, and I start working around it. But other time it can become a kind of a random way. Like with Where the Wind Grows Tall, I just drew the map first. I wanted to do like spooky farmland map, and I did that, and after that with Kamala, we started like just adding in stuff and fleshing out things, but it's all sprung from the map, from the illustration of the map. Sometimes it's an illustration, or drawing. I can do that too. Like, but I don't think there's a like fix formula for me. It's but there's that's not super helpful as a good answer, but yeah. But I guess that I would say that illustration first, but not all the time, because there's also some time where I start with writing, but that's
So for your illustrations that you do you start with like pieces of reference, or does it all just come from the brain?
I rarely use I use reference when I need to. So I always start with drawing stuff the way I like it, and sometimes when I get something that I'm not able to do, like I will get a reference, but otherwise I just start drawing on a sheet of papers and go whatever I go. I like finding out things, so often I start drawing something. I just a vague idea where I'm going with that, and I try to kind of follow what the logic of things I'm adding in one after the other.
And just to kind of keep grilling you with questions. So you do a lot of commission work, and I've got a lot of the stuff that you put into zines and whatnot. When you do work for other people, how do you set up your like working relationship? Is it kind of like they tell you prescriptively what they want, or are they giving you loose ideas and you take it in whatever direction you want to go?
Yeah, that depends on the person. Sometimes I receive very precise instruction, and these are often more difficult for me to do. They make me more anxious because I really want to do what people ask me.
Sure.
And but sometimes I have more like people say, I don't know, like draw me a bunch of characters and I'll do something with them. So that I really like it because I feel like I'm also contributing a bit to the fiction and what's going on instead of just being like a tool. And so I really like that. And yeah, but what I find difficult is it's because most of the time we're working online, and when we work online, there's like communication it's not very good. And so what was really great when I worked with Kamala is that because we were in voice chat all the time while working, so we're writing. I was like, oh wait, I drew something. Look at that, and she could say, oh yeah, that. So there were a lot of interaction. But when I work with somebody else, it's like I post something, I receive feedback like later during the day. Like it's not something.
Does anyone want to add anything else for how their design begins before we move on to how you make things scary? Like how do you design an adventure so that it will be scary at the table? Personally, I bake in some scarcity. I do a lot of scarcity, whether that be scarcity of information, scarcity of equipment, scarcity of time. But usually by taking something away, I create a tension that the players have to deal with. So I'd be interested to hear like how you're approaching making fear.
Yeah, I think again, we're trying to simulate tension. It's not like we talked about earlier. Tension isn't necessarily horror, but tension certainly helps keep you invested in the horror at the table. At a basic sense, that's really just if you don't act, bad things will happen. And you look at, Alien is another good example of this, where you're trapped on the spaceship, and if you don't do something, the xenomorph will kill you. And so kind of spinning off from there, again, that's a very simple way to design an adventure to maintain it to be scary at the table. You give the GM the tools to keep the tension going. Again, if you don't act, a bad thing will happen. If you look at Dead Planet for Mothership, if the PCs don't act, this gate will open and unleash horrors upon the universe. And even if they do act, they're probably not going to make it back to whatever life they had before this. And then another one, Gradient Descent for Mothership. There's the AI in the station that's plotting what is basically the downfall of humanity. So you can get wound up in that. But if you don't act, bad things will happen that are going to ripple out. So it keeps you moving, keeps you pushing forward, keeps you depleting resources without being able to replenish it. So, like I said, I think the key is maintaining tension.
Sure.
I'm glad you brought up Mothership because there's a really good, for me, as far as changing how I started to design horror modules or modules in general, by Sean, who sort of broke it down into two elements. The first being dilemmas instead of choices. So the difference being choices is like it can be good, can be bad, but a dilemma is specifically between bad choices and especially bad choices that make you have to violate some kind of ethical concern on your behalf, which I think is really important to generate that kind of buy-in and to generate the tension. And the other thing is it's this the way you set up those dilemmas is through it's either survive, solve, save. So save the day, survive, and sort of solve what's going on, and you only get one of those or maybe none of those. And so looking at The Thing, for example, the choices, the dilemmas being given to McCready, right, is either figures out how to kill the thing, which in that time other people are going to get replaced, other people are going to get are going to die, or he can try and survive, but then probably everyone else is going to get replaced, or he can try and kill the thing and probably die because the way to do that permanently is going to place him in great jeopardy, right? So I think um, when creating horror modules to try and elicit that buy-in. Like you need to have the buy-in from hop, or else it's just not going to be. It might be spooky or whatever, but it's not really going to be horror. But in order to keep it going and to build that tension, like you're saying, to have people forced to deplete their resources, to make the hard choices, you give them nothing but dilemmas. You give them a series of progressively worse scenarios where they have to compromise themselves and they have to compromise the rest of the party in order to achieve just one of sort of three possible objections, right? So it's like, are you going to take the cyanide or the arsenic kind of thing, right? I think that and that kind of gives a very fatalistic approach to horror, but I mean, that's my particular poison. I mean, that's why I was drawn to Trophy, because I think the fun thing about Trophy is that most games it's play to find out, right? That's like when you're describing an RPG to somebody, half the time it's going to have play to find out somewhere. But Trophy, you already know what's going to happen. You're all going to get pasted horribly in this forest, right? But you're playing to find out how. And I think that's a key element in horror, is you're playing to find out how it happens to you rather than what specifically happens to you.
Sure.
And so that I think is how you ramp up the tension, is no good choices.
No good choices.
I think that sums it up like perfectly, right? No good choices. You're offering the characters no good choices. If I think of the adventures I've designed for liminal horror, spoilers, I don't really think there technically is a way you can survive them all, but not really. And it's sort of that idea of how do you put instances that players have to reflect on how their character is changing and making choices, right? Characters can choose to do the heroic thing, but often that leads to death, right? Or like, how do they change? You were saying, like, how do they compromise themselves, or how do they physically change when there's all this, because a lot of times there's integrating body horror or sort of like unknown weird physical changes, and being like, pushing yourself, getting exposed to this could lead to me coming out the other side not the same and not within like where you started. But it comes back to like being interested in what happens to these characters and going from the get-go, knowing that it might not end in like a, like with a bow at the end, right? It might not be a happy ending. It might not be sunrise at the end. Maybe she will get away from Leatherface, but maybe not, right? And like having going in knowing that that's okay and being interested to find out, like you were saying, like find out how it happens, because we sort of know what's going to happen in the end, and enjoying that, right? That's why we're playing this kind of game and not trying to tell a different type of story.
I have a very different approach. I don't focus on tension. What I try to do is to create some kind of morbid curiosity or fascination, and I try to create characters that are unsettling but also inviting. Like you want to know them, you want to know more about them, and you want to interact with them. And the more you interact with them, at some point, well, it's too late. They're befriend you, and now they want you to murder someone or something. And I like a fiction I really like. It's like Candyman, how the anthropologist main character woman, she started investigating, she see all these things, the symbol and stuff, and she get deeper into the mystery, and at some point she's going to go back, like she's into it and she's fully grabbing. So that's the kind of our personally I really like to create, but yeah, I don't have like a formula. Again, it's more like I just try to create things that are fascinating for me, and I hope that people will find them interesting too. But yeah, I try to guide people.
Yeah, like engage them. That's we are winding down here. We got about 10 minutes left, and I do have one more question. I think we're gonna have to speed run this one, which is unfortunate. But how if you could give it a piece of advice on how to prevent the content you write from being unintentionally problematic, horror tends to lead towards, taboo and, breaking boundaries that people hold, sacred or close. What would be your approach to making sure you're not stepping into too much shit, I guess?
So I think on the level of like at the table, if I'm talking about what I'm playing, like making sure you fully like communication with the other players, safety tools, and truly understanding what is and isn't appropriate, and being aware of that and checking in constantly, right? Engaging and enjoying horror requires good communication. I think if I read also this question as what about my work as a creator, what can I do to make sure that that's not being utilized in a problematic way? If I think Liminal Horror, I explicitly talked about how I did not want to do the Cthulhu-y negative mental health stigmatizing it, and I went that with explicitly, and I stick by that, and making sure, like I'm a white cis male, and understanding that like what I write and making sure other people see it prior to releasing, to make sure that there's any either inherent biases or things I did not see can be flagged for me. And that way I can make those and be open to making those changes, because my goal is to not contribute to the the problematic nature that comes up in our scene. And that's through listening, communication, and, making changes when it's necessary.
For sure. Learning.
Right? Being willing to learn, being open to it, I think is important too.
Yeah.
If somebody tells you what you're doing is, problematic, responding in kind, not just doubling down and digging your heels in to say that you're right.
I find having people read with my transcripts, having sensitivity reads, having editors that aren't, the same background as me, being able to get out of my own head on things, because, we see things very singularly when we're working on them, and other people can find, problems and stuff that you'd never even realize unless you, actually put it out there. So, collaboration is a big part for me. Opening it up and not letting it live in my head the whole time, I guess. And you find things that you're like I just reread Demon Fleck Cleveland and found like 6 typos, and I was like, damn it. But other than that, it's just being able to learn, opening up your mind, listening, like when people are saying, hey, this is a problem, really listening to them. Does anyone else, Evlyn, Noora, do you have anything to add?
I was just going to say, like, extrapolating on all of that is with the communication is surrounding yourself with a community of people who will take you to task when necessary, and like Josh was saying, being open to hearing that feedback and making changes, because it's I think it's so important to have people around you that will say, hey, I don't know about that, for a variety of reasons, whether it's typo or whether it's something that is, can play into problematic tropes, and so it's good to, like, you not only have to be open to change, but you have to have people that are like it's so important to have a writing group to bounce ideas off people. You know what I mean? Like Evlyn was saying, when you were working with Camilla, talking and as you're talking it through, bouncing ideas off each other, because it's easier to work, and it's a step of editing right there.
Yeah, that's one of those things. After I worked with Riley on Zen 2 Knots back, which released during the fall, I came out of that experience. I was like, I never want to do a major project by myself. Like, I like writing adventures. I have no interest in being like an auteur or whatever. And anything I want to do going forward, I want to get a group together to collaborate on it. Like, down to, I do the design work and the layout for the projects I do mostly myself, but definitely writing. And I love working with artists. Like, it's my favorite thing in the world now is to talk with artists, let them have some sort of contribution to the project. And again, not just be tools.
Right.
Earlier, so getting everybody on board, talking through the entire team, having this whole thing that helps, again, keep you in check. and seeking out intentionally varied creators. Like if I just find three people that are just like me to be on that collaborative project, that's not really going to make anything interesting.
Evlyn, do you have anything you wanted to put in here?
No, well, like everybody said, like getting out of your own point of view of things and trying to seek out a point of view and trying to be sensitive and being thinking about the people that are around you and saying like, well, how that will feel for that person, I know. But yeah, I've done some sensitivity reading, like for leadership and some stuff like that. So I think you need to know that if you ask somebody to read your stuff, it's work, especially if it's a big document, and so that's good to pay people. Like I rarely get asked to do sensitivity reading. I offer it, but rarely happen, I would say. So I think that could be done a bit more, maybe in the industry.
Sure.
I will say Evlyn was one of the first people to read Liminal Horror and gave me feedback prior to major finishing and changing some things, like carryover from Karen called a warden, which I get a warden of a forest, but for this when we were talking about not being mentally health stigmatizing, warden carries another connotation too. And Evlyn was like, hey, you should reconsider this. So
that's that practice that we're talking about in action, like doing it and moving forward, having empathy, and getting out of your own head. We are out of time, but I do want to take some time for each of you to be able to talk about where people can find your works, where they can find you on the internet. So we're going to go down that same line, starting with Evlyn.
So I got a Patreon, search Evlyn Moreau, you can find my Patreon, and usually there will be news of me there. Right now I'm working I'm wrapping up a big commission for a third-party mothership adventure. I've done all the illustration and interior art, cover, everything, so that will be fun when it will come out. And when that will be over, I will be able to go back to work on my scenario for Liminal Horror that is called The Potato King, and it's about fast food horror.
it's so good. It's so
amazing.
Much fun.
Yeah, Nick, you're up.
Yeah, I'm Goblin Archives. You can find me at Twitter, mostly at Goblin_Archives. I have a blog that I put up supplemental rules for it. My big focus is on really supporting that and writing adventures for it and supporting people writing adventures for it. I'll have fun playing around in that system, and I'm not going to move on anytime soon. Yeah, I'll pass it off to Josh.
So I'm Josh. You can find me on Twitter at Unenthuser. That's Unenthusiastic User combined into one. I also have an itch.io page. That's itch.io/Unenthuser. Upcoming work. So I'd be helping out, potentially doing some more support on the Little Horror going forward into the future as I write my own projects and maybe help other people bring stuff to the future. But you can also find me working with the Afterthought Committee on potentially some other unannounced upcoming projects going forward. But keep your eyes out because, like I said, July 15th is the start of the Exalted Funeral Summer Sale, where both Tangled and the Bureau will go live for physical sale.
I guess awesome. I should say the mall too is also going for physical sale. I should pitch my own stuff.
Noora, please.
Yeah, so you can find me at www.monkeyspawgames.com. You can also find me on Twitter at Roses on a Grave, but I do not recommend it. It is a bad place. Additionally, if you go on Monkey's Paw Games, which I have to fix the link now, but I am part of a cooperative, a chapbook co-op that helps up-and-coming, particularly marginalized creators get funds to print their zines. And I'm partnered up with Loot the Room in the UK and Spear Witch in the US, and also Ratty and Cantati in Canada. And we want to throw money at getting people who are first-time and inexperienced zine creators to get zines printed. So check that out.
Awesome. Amazing. And I'm Logan Dean. You can find me on Twitter at L__Dean, the long L. I sell games on mega-corp.itch.io. That's my game company, Megacorp, with our flagship game, The Company. I want to take a quick second to thank all of our panelists for chatting today. This was really exciting. And I'm so glad we all got to kind of get together and talk about, what we're passionate about. I hope that everybody viewing enjoyed the conversation, and I hope you have a good rest of your con. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great day.